We're so glad to have you. And I'm also glad that in the expectations that were shared, a few things were said, which I noted. Some of us talked about measuring impact. I believe, I can't remember your name, from some guy, you were talking about just telling your impact stories joy. And then someone talked about just frameworks, and that's stuff that I like to hear about. And let me just introduce myself. Maybe I'll just go back. I'm the co-founder of the Comms Avenue, but besides being the co-founder, I am also a communications advisor and corporate trainer. I love to train comms teams. I teach across board, anything communications and teaching. So I will try not to make this a lecture so that you can learn from it, but this is something I'm really passionate about, because how many of us have had people question the value of the work that we do? Show of hands. What comms bringing to the table? But the truth is, comms actually does a lot. We do a lot of work. Comms is actually at the center of organizational performance and success. Do you know what the problem is? We don't show our results. We do not show our working. So I hope that in this session, so learning session 1, we're going to be looking at the theory of change and then the strategic communications framework. For learning session 2, we will now be looking at measurements. Are you with me? All right, fantastic. So let's go into it. So for this one, we're going to be looking at, if I said, what is the theory of change? How many of us have heard about the theory of change? We should. We are development people. If you have no edits, it's all right. I'll teach you on it, but very briefly. And how does that connect to strategic communications frameworks? And then we'll just look at some examples and scenarios. My accurate timekeeper, please keep me in check. Thank you very much. All right. So you have the DCR notepads with you, or if you brought a notepad, I want you to please think about what are the key outcomes or results that your organization wants to achieve in 2025. And please write either 1 or 2. If you don't know, write I don't know. But if you don't know, there's a problem. But 1 or 2, just write it down. What is the key outcome or results as expressed by your executives, by your leaders? What exactly are we looking out to achieve as an organization in 2025? I will not do show of. I did a class a few weeks ago and I asked this question and I saw some people were not writing. So that, is it that you don't know? I was like, no, okay. If you don't know, you need to know. So write down at least 2. So number 1, we want to do this. Number 2, we want to expand to whatever it is that is a key organization. Remember, organizational, not from your communications perspective. Are we done with that, or shall I give you 1 more minute to do it? Okay, I see people writing. People are really writing furiously. I love it. Okay, so we don't have time. Let me go. All right, so we're going to keep what you've written. We're going to come back to it. I will make reference to it. But let me start by explaining what the theory of change is. This is the technical definition. I like to simplify things, but it's good for us to know the technicalities. And this is someone, Professor Jim McNamara. For every one of you that you want to learn about measurement, this is somebody you should really follow. Google him, get his resources. He's a lecturer, professor. There's a video on YouTube about evaluation. We'll be sharing a resource after this session where we're going to put some resources that we believe will be able to help you. But coming into the theory of change, it is a process of thinking thoroughly about what will cause the desired change or impact, and then establishing the link between the programs or initiatives that you will do and how that will lead to your goals. So let's break it down. Let's say, I heard us talking about agriculture. Let's say that our goal is to enable smallholder farmers to embrace modern agricultural practices, or we want them maybe to use less harmful fertilizer. That is the change that we want to see. Now, theory of change is saying that you take that outcome and you say, what is going to help us to allow the farmers to stop using these fertilizers? What programs do we need to do? How do we need to communicate? And so you see this thing that programs, who works in core programs here? Anybody? Isn't that programs? They will design programs. They not say comes. Does it happen to us? Yes. It's very bad. You should never allow it. After this day, do never allow, because it's that thing is dead on arrival, because they will have created this program, but they have not thought about the communication element. We are not there. You have to be there. You have to set it as a standard. As you are designing these programs, we have to co-create it, because they are not thinking from a communications perspective. So I give you permission to challenge them. But when they're designing that program of how do we get the farmers to stop using harmful fertilizers, we come with a communication cap and say, this needs to be done in this design. If, for example, they say, oh, they want to do some sort of town hall, and we say, because they are in rural settings, this may not work. And that's how you think about the theory of change. What are the activities that will lead to the eventual outcome? Is it clear what it is? And I'll try to break it down. And so how do you go through the theory of change? The first thing is thinking about what steps do we need to take. So the outcomes that you have written in your notepad, what do we need to do to achieve this? That is a question you need to be asking. So you start from the desired change and then you work backwards. If we say we want the farmers to stop using harmful fertilizer, what conditions must be in place to achieve that change? And let's have a discussion about this. So you want farmers to stop using harmful fertilizer. Now, the good fertilizer, if it's far away from them, will they stop using the harmful ones? So it means that we need to create access to the products, right? So it means that the supply chain, something needs to be done. Now, that's not a communications problem, but communications needs to be thinking about it. We need to be thinking about the gaps and the things that can stop us from achieving the desired change. And so you're thinking about it. If you want to go and create your materials, and you're going into Owerri, going into some rural area in Rwanda, what do you need to start thinking about in terms of communication? Who can tell me? You're going to a rural area, a rural community. Language. So you cannot come with communication materials that are written in English. Thank you, sir. He said culture. Those are the things that thinks about program, may or may not think about it. So you say, what are the conditions that will lead to this change? The one that is in your power, you do. The one that you get, let's say, hey guys, this is not going to work for this target audience because of so and so factors. Now, next thing is to question the assumptions made in identifying what will lead to the desired change. So if we've made an assumption that once we supply this good fertilizer, they will automatically use it, is that really true? It's not true. So we have to question every assumption that you make. It must be based on something. It means that somebody must have gone on ground to even understand, why do you use this harmful fertilizer? Because aside from access, guess what? Cost may be a factor. Aside from that, you know that there's a way human beings, we're so used to doing something. Because they are used to that fertilizer, they can tell you it smells. Sorry, I'm not a fertilizer pro. I'm just using an example. Maybe they like the way it smells. Maybe it's the texture. Maybe it's the fact that they get their crops faster. So those are barriers that we have to think about. And then you need solid evidence to validate your approach. When we go into the session on the framework, ladies and gentlemen, we can no longer do communications without research and data. No. Programs cannot come and say we're doing this and we just say, okay, press conference, this. No. How? We have to do the research. What are we trying to do here? Who is the target audience? So that we select the right strategy and tactics. That is what is going to impact on your results and the stories that you tell. So the focus is on the goals and the activities that need to happen to achieve the change. And this is where you co-create with programs team. And so when you go to programs, I hope that this session will give you the language to tell them, because they will ask you why. I don't know, they have this confidence. I like to meet programs team and just say, why? Is it not just two? I really hate that statement. Oh God, is it not just two? And please, ladies and gentlemen, you will tell them that it is not just two, because some of you will just do it. No, from now on, you will explain why it is not what? Just two. Thank you very much. Okay. So here's an example of the theory of change in practice. This is a quitting smoking campaign that, an organization did. So if we start from the end, what they want is people to quit smoking. So we come to the actions. What needs to happen for people to quit smoking? They have to make the attempt, right? If they don't make the attempt, they are not quitting. Now, before they can make the attempts, there has to be some sort of intent or desire. So how many of us know that buyer funnel? When you go from consideration, exactly, it's the same thing. It's just that we're using different terminologies. There has to be an intent, because some people are, I don't know if anybody's a smoker yet. They smoke the smoke, like that's on you. So there has to be an intent. Now, they have said here that to create that intent, they want to create the awareness of the risks of smoking. This, you have to make sure that it will work with the target audience, because I used to find it very fascinating. People will go and buy tobacco. It's written there on the box. What's that thing? Smokers are liable to die young. Adverts, smokers, but yet people will buy it and be. So that means that awareness of the risk may not necessarily prompt people. So we have to question that with research, right? And then what is the activity? So we have this commit to quit campaign. So you do your social media, you do everything. Now, communications, here's where we're coming. And every of these stages, what are we doing? So we want to create awareness. Maybe you want to use influencers, you want to partner with people, you want to distribute information. For the intent to quit smoking, this peer support line, it has nothing to do with comms, but guess what? We have to supply them with the information that will get them. Because again, if somebody wants to quit smoking, they call the helpline, and the helpline is like, oh, so what do you want? It discourages them, doesn't it? So we need to supply them with the right information, and then we're gathering our success stories. So the person that asked the question about stories, it is at this point that you are gathering the relevant stories and content. Now, let me say this with your interfacing with programs. You may not be the one to go into the field, but please, you must be equipping your programs team on what to collect, which information is useful. They cannot come back and there's no content. They cannot come back and there's no story. And then in the quitting attempt, health practitioners advise quitting aids, maybe incentives, but you are making sure that everything leads to the final result: improved individual health, reduced health costs. This is what happens to us. When people are talking about, oh, this is what we achieved, improved individual health, we've seen reduced health costs, they now say, so comes, what do you do? What comes did a campaign, right? That created what? Awareness. That motivated people to what? Quit smoking. And then do the final thing. But what happens? Because we didn't track stage by stage, we just say, oh, we put out social media posts, but we cannot show the linkages between that social media post and the eventual results. That's the missing link. Are we clear? Is it making sense? Thank you. Okay, so do I have time for this? Okay, let me do the quick one. This is another one, change for health. It's the same process. So you want to improve the health outcomes in a particular country or region. And so you look at it in the society. How do we improve health behaviors? What kind of health programs? How do we create more positive attitudes to public health? And then you push out your communication for health messages, you engage your stakeholders. There's so many things that you can do, but the point is, have it in a very systematic way and make sure that at every step of the way, you're channeling people to your eventual outcome. Now, this is generally the strategic communications framework, which Sharon is going to speak to you about. But this is the flow. Whenever I teach the strategic communications framework, so I engage with comms professionals. Sometimes we have a week-long workshop. I have one of my co-participants from last year here. Sometimes it's about 6 weeks, and they say, Adedoyin, this is a lot. This is that. Yes, it's a lot for a reason. But if you do it and you do it well, you will see a difference in your results. And so you start with the situation analysis and the context. I'm just going to read it out because we'll go into in-depth. Looking at the goals and the objectives. What are we trying to achieve here? What are we doing? Understanding your audience and your stakeholders. Sometimes we make big assumptions about our audience and stakeholders. Messaging. What is our eventual strategy? Tactics. Comms professionals. This is where we start from. Are you seeing the number it is on this list? We start from tactics, timing, budget, risk assessment, and then your measurement and evaluation. But before I hand over, I want to quickly connect the dots. Theory of change, strategic communications framework. At the heart of both of them is the change and the impact that you want to make. What are we trying to achieve here? What is the impact? Because you need to always have it at the forefront of your mind. Because when you know the change or impact to be made, you already know the kind of baseline figures you need to be getting. You know the data. You know, some of us, we create comms objectives and plans. We'll say, oh, we want to create awareness. How do you know that at the end of the program that awareness has been created if you don't have a baseline or a benchmark? And so the theory of change outlines the desired change or impact. It works backwards. What the strategic communications framework is saying that at every stage of this theory of change, what is the role of communication? What will we be doing in measurable and, what did I write here? Measurable and tangible terms. I will talk more on it when we get to measurement, but for both of them, the question is, what do we want to achieve? I will repeat this many times so that you can remember, what are we doing here? What exactly do we want to achieve? So let me do a quick recap. So we're going to identify the impact desired, and then you work backwards. You identify the communication outcomes and what you need to achieve to contribute to the desired impact. Then you identify the output. What do we need to create? Do we need to create flyers? Do we need to create billboards? Do we need to create materials? What are those communication outputs that would lead to the outcomes? And then the inputs. Do we need research? Do we need to survey people? Do we need to get some sort of data from the audience that we want to reach? And how would that contribute to the output? So Sharon will take the strategic communications and we'll do some Q&A at the end. So thank you for your attention. Let me hand over now to Sharon.
How are we doing? So far, so good?
Yeah.
We're not overwhelmed? All right. Good morning, everyone. So good to be here with you. My name is Sharon Adaigbe. I'm co-founder of the Comms Avenue. And I'm here. Oh, bonjour. I'm here to take you through the strategic communications framework. Now, I want to say something very interesting. You are here today because the Comms Avenue is on a crusade. And that crusade is very simple. We are here to ensure that communications professionals evolve from being tactical foot soldiers who post and do press release. We want you to evolve from that to being strategic partners for the business, for the organization. Partners who are in the room, at the table, making decisions, giving strategic insights and advisory. Right. So sometimes when your executives or your senior leaders want to do certain things, the things that they say, sometimes you may have questions, you may not really be aligned, but sometimes you cannot push back because you don't have a framework. You don't have a frame of reference for why you should say no. And that's one thing that the strategic communications framework is going to help you do. It's going to give you the basis to be able to push back on certain things, to be able to speak from a data-driven and insights-driven perspective. And I'll just go through a couple of definitions that I found very interesting, and then we'll get into what it really is. So there's one here from the International Association of Business Communicators. And it says that a strategic communications framework is a structured approach to planning and executing communications that support an organization's strategic goals, ensuring message alignment and audience engagement. So for me, the keywords are very simple. We have a structured approach. So our communications is not random. It's not that thing we do where we take the plan we did last year, change the company name, and rinse and repeat. It has to be structured. And then we have another key phrase, which is strategic goals. So back to the question that Adedoyin asked. If you don't know what your organization's strategic goals are, what your organization is trying to achieve for 2025 to 2026, and you people have done retreats already, if you don't remember those things or you're not using those things to guide your day-to-day activities, then you need to go back to the drawing board. And we're seeing in this definition that at the end of the day, what you're going to have is message alignment and audience engagement. So there are two other definitions. The second one talks about a roadmap, and the next one talks about a systematic approach. And I think that you can see that there's something in common from all three. The fact that we're going line by line, step by step, making sure that what we're doing is not random and that we can defend it at the end of the day. So here's what goes into a strategic communications framework. If you do your research, you'll see that there are different models, different frameworks, but at the end of the day, these are the 8 elements that need to be there, that need to be present, and we'll dive into them in subsequent slides. This one is the situation, analysis, and context. Communications does not exist in a vacuum. Whenever there's a communications opportunity, it means that something is happening within the organization or about to happen within the organization, within the macroeconomic environment, and all of those things need to be taken into consideration. We have goals and objectives. So when I have goals and objectives here, and both referring to your organization's goals and your communications objectives. What do you want to achieve with your communications that you're putting out? The next thing we have is your audience and your stakeholder analysis. Because as we know, your audience, they're part of the stakeholders, and then your stakeholders are there and they're not necessarily, your audience. We also have your messaging strategy. What are you saying? How are you saying it? When are you saying it? What do you want your audience to know, feel, and do after they receive that message? And then we have your strategy. So the strategic approaches, that you will take to achieving your communications plan. The next element where we all, find ourselves defaulting to is tactics and activities. But like you can see, we have to go right from the beginning before we get to that point. This means that by the time you're talking tactics and talking activities, you are coming from a very data-driven, insights-driven perspective. You can defend why you want to do certain things. If you think there should be a town hall, you can say why, because you're speaking to certain people. This is what you want to say. It's very, very strategic. The next element will be timing, budget, and risk assessment. And this is so important because, as you know, sometimes within an organization, certain things have to happen with certain people before certain things can go on. For example, if you're putting out some very sensitive information that may affect the company's reputation, the shareholders cannot be the last to hear about it, or your board cannot be the last to hear about it. So timing is very important in timing communications activities. And then lastly, measurement and evaluation. And this one, I didn't even do a deep dive at the end because it's a lot. A lot of people have issues with this. Now, can I be frank? If we were to spend 3 days on this, we wouldn't even be done. And I don't even have up to 3 hours. So I'm going to focus on a few things that are very important, and then we can take questions at the end and see how we maximize our time. All right, so the first element is the situation analysis and context. And this simply speaks to the internal and external context or environments within which you are situating your communications activities. The first one, and I'm sure we are familiar with this model, the PESTLE model. Can I see by show of hands who knows about PESTLE? Yeah, most of us. So PESTLE is a framework that businesses use to really analyze risk and analyze, their context, their operating environment. P stands for political, E stands for economic, S stands for social, T is for technological, L is for legal, and E is for environmental. Right now, if you are a student of what's happening in the world, you know that the P in PESTLE is hot in the world right now. From what's happening in America to what's happening in Israel. And the interesting thing that I want you to remember as a comms professional is global politics affects you here in Nigeria. You cannot be oblivious to what's happening in the world as a communications professional. You cannot be someone who doesn't read the news to see what's going on. It's affecting your workplace. It's affecting your organization. It's affecting your country. It's affecting your partners. So you must be aware so that you can keep ahead of the risks and keep evolving, because communications plans and organization goals will always evolve depending on what's happening in the environment. These things are not static. So that's PESTLE refers to, what's happening in the environment, and it's a very good framework for you to use. So I'll go down to SWOT, because SWOT is your internal environment. You use SWOT to really check what's happening internally. So you're checking your organization for your strengths. What are we doing differently from our competitors that makes us stand out? What's our advantage? What's our competitive advantage? What are the weaknesses? What are the opportunities in the environment right now? And what are the threats that we need to keep ahead of? So that's the SWOT analysis. And then there's your competitive landscape. So I know that, it's good to, everybody has their own lane and it's good to focus, but you must know what's happening to your left and to your right. You must know who the other players in your environment are, because they are competing for funding with you. They are competing for attention with you. And very interestingly, they're competing for talent with you. So people are going to work in other organizations and not yours because of a certain perception. And that's the competitive landscape. You need to keep ahead of that as well. The last one is cultural and regional considerations. And I think we already spoke to that briefly. when you are communicating in several regions or different regions, there are certain things you take into consideration that may not be relevant in your own context. And I'll give you a very funny example. So do we have any K-drama fans in the house? And you say, right. So K-drama is Korean drama. And I think one of the things I like about it is it gives me an inroad into what Asian culture is like. You're able to see that. And I realized that when an organization, something has gone wrong, there's a crisis or whatever, the way they apologize to their stakeholders is very, very formal. It's very structured. The CEO comes, bows before everybody. It's taken very, very seriously. It's very regimented. A comms officer cannot go and apologize or just send out a random press release. It's a very, very serious issue. If you think about the same scenario, a crisis in the West, it's not exactly the same thing. So that's a funny way of explaining that sometimes, all the time rather, cultural and regional considerations will always come into play when you're thinking about your context and the things that you need to do. And then I'll jump straight into goals and objectives. So as we've said, think about the broader business goals that your communications activities are linked to. There is no reason why whatever you've outlined on the paper in terms of your communication activities, there's no reason why it should have no bearing on what the business is trying to do. And this needs to be done very strategically. And the second thing will be your objective. So what you are trying to achieve with your actual communication activities. And very importantly, these must be measurable. They must be smart. And we'll talk about it towards the end. The third element of the strategic communications framework is your audience and stakeholder analysis. Now, I've taken it for granted that we already know about psychographics, demographics, geographical and behavioral, that framework for deciphering our audience. But I wanted to just highlight power and interest matrix as well, because not all stakeholders require the same frequency of communication or the same, permit me to use the word priority in terms of engagement. So this matrix very simply highlights that there are certain stakeholders that have low power or high power, and on the horizontal grid, there are some stakeholders that have low interest or and high interest. So for those who, for example, have a low interest in what's going on, that may be your general public, for example, and low power, you just want to do the minimum and monitor. For those who have high power, for example, and also high interest, like your shareholders, you want to be managing them closely. Very important, because any little thing can get you into trouble. So this is very important. And I realize that sometimes you're juggling multiple projects. So you have multiple stakeholders, but all of them need to be kept managed, using a simple matrix like this so that you are aware. So I have this little example, stakeholder mapping for a rural education project. So imagine that there's a project that's aiming to enhance education in underserved regions. There are certain people that need to be brought along the process as we plan out whatever program or project it is. And the first one I've highlighted here is your Ministry of Education, for example. There's no way that you will be doing a project in the education sector without engaging your regulatory bodies. They are high interest, high power stakeholders that can shut you down. So you want to make sure that you are briefing them regularly. You are having those collaboration meetings and keeping them satisfied. The second set of stakeholders I have outlined here, community leaders. Very often you find that even though you want to do something that's in the general interest of the children, you have to carry the community leaders along. They want to feel important, even if it doesn't, affect them directly. So they have medium power, but they are very highly interested. So you know how it works in Nigeria. For example, if you're from West Africa, you want to make sure that participatory meetings are going on and that you're keeping them carried along. The teachers who will execute on some of these things you're doing, you need to upskill them, you need to provide them with peer support forums, you need to give them materials, all of those things, medium in terms of power and interest. And then you have your donors, for example. Your donors have high power because if your donors do not fund your project is shut down. So you need to make sure that you are providing them the reports, showing them the impact and engaging regularly. So this is just an example. And for your different projects, this is something you want to make sure that you're on top of so that you don't drop any balls. And sometimes as things evolve, stakeholders shift, along the grid. So you need to also bear that in mind and make sure you're not rinsing and repeating when things have evolved. Okay, so I'll quickly touch on the messaging strategy. When it comes to messaging, you want to really focus on how your stakeholders and what you want your stakeholders to know, what you want them to feel, what you want them to do as a result of the messaging. And this can be discussed in 1 hour because it's such a lot of information. But basically, what you're thinking about beyond the words that you're writing, you want to really begin with the audience. Who am I speaking to? What do they need to know? What do I want them to do after they've received this communication? And then another important element is your language and tone. Recently, a telecommunications company in Nigeria got into trouble. They released communication talking about a rather serious issue. It was serious to their subscribers, but they used a very light-hearted tone. They even used pidgin English, and their subscribers are not having it because they were not happy that they had to pay extra money, in that circumstance. So it's really important that you really understand that tone matters depending on what the scenario is, and take that into consideration. We've already spoken about timing and sequence, and then of course we have formats and platforms. And I think this is so important that we constantly continue to check, because if you work in an organization where you get the feedback, this is the way we've always done it, how can you prove that the new method or new platform you want to try is worthy of consideration? That's what this framework will help you do. You will be able to speak categorically to your stakeholders to say, this is why we should explore this. You have the data, you have the research. So you don't just pick platforms or stick with platforms because they're traditional. You want to be sure that there's a reason why you continue to, do things in certain ways. And very importantly, lastly, as much as you can, if it's a high stakes project or program, you want to see if you can test your messaging beforehand, before putting billboards all over and getting blowback because the message did not land. You want to test and make sure you have appropriate approvals. Okay, we're moving fast. So strategy. So this is really the data-driven basis for your tactics. We've walked through from the beginning, talking about our context. We've spoken about our audience. We've spoken about our messaging. And we're right here. The strategic approaches you can possibly use. There are a couple of them. These are not all. But the idea is this. You want to begin to tie everything together, making sure that you've taken into consideration who the audience is, what they need to know, what's happening in your external environment. And then you can then start to look at what you need to deploy in terms of strategic approaches. So some of the tactics that you would then be deploying under those strategic approaches could be any of these and much more depending on what the scenario is. Of course, if you're into capacity building and training, you're talking about training the trainer models, you're talking about workshops. If what the strategic approach you need to deploy is stakeholder communication and advocacy, it means that you're doing policy briefs, it means you're engaging your stakeholders in events very regularly, and that you're engaging in the media as well. So there is always a reason why certain things are deployed in terms of your communication plans, and it's important to have that holistic perspective. So there's this PISO model. Is there anybody that hasn't seen this? I'm sure everybody has seen the PISO model. Okay, everybody has seen this. So this is something that can help you as well when you're trying to figure out what channels to deploy, what platforms to use. It's a media framework that will help you when it comes to content distribution, because I remember someone asked a question about how do you get the work you're doing to be amplified. PISO really stands for paid, shared, and owned, and these are different media channels. The framework was developed by Jeannie Dietrich a little over 10 years ago, and it's been very useful for communications professionals in trying to figure out, okay, what channels do I need to deploy to make sure that the messaging that we're putting out is, getting out there. So paid stands for media channels that you need to pay for really. And that includes your ads, your digital ads, that includes your content distribution on syndicated platforms, your earned media, which is really nice. A lot of times, those are the ones that give you that credibility where you have referrals coming in, or you have the media picking up certain things that you're doing. There's shared media, which is, of course, social media, content creation, all of those things that we do. And owned media, that's really the media that you can control, the case studies that you're putting out, the things that the reports you're generating, the impact reports that you're sharing. All of these need to come together to be able to give you the level of awareness that you want for your projects and programs. Quickly speak to timing, budget, and risk assessment. With timing, we've already said that it's important to always create a timeline. Whenever you have a project, multiple projects going on, it's very easy to drop the ball. Personally, I'm happy with Excel. A Gantt chart on Excel helps me to see what's happening so that I know what needs to be done by when, the dates are tracked. A regular to-do list, sometimes you will get into trouble with a regular to-do list, but a Gantt chart, or if you have budget to go for tools like Asana or Trello, those are very helpful because they will even send you email reminders. But the point is, you want to be able to see what you need to do, what your dependencies are, what the blockers are, and who is accountable for what. Very important as you plan. When it comes to budgeting, it's important to also account for costs like human resources, including the freelancers that you work with, your operating costs, your technology costs. Now, budgeting is a very soft spot because I realize a lot of people have encountered that perennial issue where we have to defend our budgets and do a lot of things with very little. But just like was said at the beginning, by the time you learn to properly defend your work and really talk about outcomes and impact versus activities, it will be easier for you to really fight. I wish we didn't have to fight, but it will be easier for you to have that conversation, with actual facts and figures. All right. The last thing on timing, budget, and risk assessment is very important to always keep an eye on the risks. For whatever project or program that you're running, I find that there are many factors that we need to keep a handle on. So it's important that you identify potential risks and develop your mitigation strategies. There's no reason why your crisis communications plans should not be ready so that you deploy if you need to. You may not need to, but you need to have it ready. And then lastly, measurement and evaluation, which we'll go into in the next session. Now, the foundation for successful measurement is the objectives you set at the beginning. Remember, the second element we discussed was goals and objectives. Your objectives determine what you will be evaluating at the end of the day. So you need to make sure that those objectives are measurable. And Adedoyin will go on to explain a bit more. And lastly, on measurement and evaluation, please make sure that you are tracking outcomes, you are tracking impacts, not activities. We don't need to know how many press releases you sent out in a quarter. That has no bearing on the business, But we're going to go into that in a few minutes. So just to recap, SCF refers to a structured approach to planning and executing your comms, and it always supports your organization's strategic goals, so it's not done in a vacuum. Your objectives, audience, and stakeholders determine everything else in your plan, so you need to pay special attention to this. And lastly, please don't drop straight to tactics. This era of tactics is over. You are a strategic advisor for your organization. Please ensure that you are taking a structured approach that is systematic.